Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Elitist Geek VR news for Sunday, October 2nd, 2016. Lots to talk about. Let's jump right into VR, guys. Quick bit of preamble. So just regarding the channel, moving forward, it's actually my wife's birthday today. She mentioned this. Usually, you guys know Friday's kind of my gaming night. Saturday's traditionally kind of a date day, me and the wife. I only mention that because she's approached me and said, look, why don't you, with the growth of your channel, get some more time for your gaming stuff. Do it on the Saturday. It's all good. We can watch movies at night, which I thought was just awesome, unless it was a test, because then I probably failed. Shit. Didn't think about that. Let's take her at her word, right? And assume that is the case. I will have more time to feature stuff that I haven't been able to do, like Gear VR. I don't think I have a single Gear VR game video up, which is a shame because there's lots of fun games on that unit. It's mostly Rift and Vive stuff right now. So that'll give me the time to get the Gear VR stuff out. And of course, Sony, which is just around the corner. Speaking of which, a fantastic VR YouTuber that I like to watch, a fellow Dutchman too, his name's Nady, has an additional unit that he's offering to sell me a PlayStation VR, which is awesome. We're kind of going over the details to see if that's possible. We can make that happen. If so, it would mean I'd have a unit definitely here for the launch, which would be awesome. If not, I still appreciate his offer. I will do what I can to secure a unit on that day. So very cool if this works out with him. So very much appreciated, Nady. All right, let's jump into the news. This is not an I told you so because most of you had the exact same sentiment about it as we watched the phenomenon known as Pokemon Go unfold. And, I mention it in as much as while I don't think they're the same at all, AR and VR, they do belong in similar discussions. And we are definitely waiting for the application on the VR side of the things, similar to what Pokemon Go did for AR, right? Now, back in June, July, we kind of had those talks and we said, look, probably once all the kids go back to school, by October, we're just going to be hearing crickets. Well, it's not exactly crickets we're hearing. It has significantly died down, as predicted. What's neat about this is the behind the scenes. So Google actually produced a chart showing what they targeted the bandwidth requirements for the cloud server side of the equation to be. Their worst case scenario, which they said was 5 times their original estimation, and then the reality of what actually unfolded, which 50 times their original guess, or you could say 10 times their worst case scenario. They actually got 50 times the traffic estimate when it launched. So it's a no wonder they couldn't keep up with the server demand. It is not as easy, contrary to what you might think. It's not just a question of pushing the power button on extra servers. There's configuration, there's work that goes in to expanding a server farm, especially an expansion as significant as 50 times, because realistically, you can't expand it for 50 times because you will end up with a lot of dead weight, right? That 50 times will die down, just like it did. So it's a kind of a neat behind the scenes look at guesses, because we've all probably experienced this. If you've ever played an MMO, and I've played 2 of the most popular with EverQuest and World of Warcraft, both of them had issues launch day, launch week with capacity. And you could argue that, the numbers were much smaller for them than the 50 times that Pokemon Go had. So, interesting topic, just to kind of get to see behind the scenes what the actual traffic was versus what they estimated, right? Next up, news-wise, this one is cool because we've talked about, and just as early as yesterday's news video, where I talked about the 7 uses for virtual reality outside of gaming. Well, this was one that I haven't really talked about, and it has to do with police work or, hardcore detective war criminal hunting type work. So we get this story. It was featured on The Guardian, Yahoo, a lot of websites talked about it today. Bavarian police using VR to recreate 1940s death camp Auschwitz. And what's so amazing about this is they're using it as a prosecution tool. By recreating accurately what the death camp looked like in the 40s, they can, counter defense arguments. Things like, well, where I was sitting in my office, I couldn't see bodies being disposed of or people being marched to gas chambers. They can go back and say, actually, based on the skyline of the time, there were no trees on that field. You had a direct view of that, right? And I don't need to get into the specifics of that to get the point across. It's using VR as that kind of a tool to recreate crime scenes. Hell, recreate ancient battles to help educators understand those battles, right? I fully expect that capability, like the Battle of Hastings, which is one of the most popular medieval battles, right? In 1066, to be able to see how the Saxons failed to defend against the Normans, right? Even though supposedly they had terrain advantage, they had, higher ground, etc., etc., etc. Taking something like the Total War engine, but a more modern version of that, mixing in VR and letting it unfold will just be amazing. And it's going to blow the door off of forensics and so many different areas once that technology gets a little further along. So very cool to see it be used in that way. Next up, HTC was crowned Gadget of the Year. The HTC Vive was, by T3 Magazine. Now, they have an annual award show. It's kind of, they call it like the Oscars for tech. So it's not just a fly-by-night award. It's a fairly prestigious technical award to be awarded. So very cool. Congrats to Vive for getting that. Like I said, I love mine equally, and I'd be happy if any device, that was a VR device, is awarded Gadget of the Year. So very, very cool. Congrats. Next up, chip advancement in the areas of virtual reality and smart cars has just gone crazy the last couple of years. And it makes sense because a lot of those advances that they've made in those areas have pretty much been sitting dormant for the last few decades. Stuff like positional tracking, really military use, absolutely, but gaming, it hasn't really been a focus. Then you've got stuff like AI navigation for the self-driving cars. Again, areas that have been fairly dormant. Obviously, there's groups working on these, but it hasn't been near as widespread as the effort of the last few years. And the result of that is all kinds of cool, powerful, specialized chipsets being developed that would have probably been deemed impossible or highly unlikely just 20 years ago. So very, very cool, as with all of this, to see, technology going off in all these different directions. Little closer to, passive media side of things, Lionsgate, the film company, is bringing a 7-minute preview of an upcoming virtual reality game dealing with content from John Wick, the movie, which I'm going to say up front, I never watched. I've seen Bill and Ted's, Speed, and a couple of others of his movies, obviously The Matrix. Not saying I'm not a huge fan. I'm not a huge fan, so I guess I am saying that. But I don't really dislike him. It's just every time I watch him in a movie, all I see is his Bill and Ted's character. And that's not his fault. Well, kind of it is. But it's more just a sticking point for me. And, what a cult movie Bill and Ted's was when I watched it, right? So, 7-minute preview. That's going to be shown at the upcoming Comic-Con in New York. There's going to be a full version, a full VR game in February, which is going to coincide with the February 10th release of the second John Wick movie. So that's why all this John Wick stuff, and also Star VR HMDs at a select IMAX VR center, the one in LA, is going to have an IMAX version called John Wick Chronicles Arcade Edition. So be very cool to see those. I'm curious about the 7-minute demo most because it's going to give us a really good idea of what the full game is going to deliver. Next up, an older tech article that ended up just being bang on. And if there's anybody ever who had the right to hold up a sign saying, "I told you so," it would probably be David Watkins, director of strategy at his own company called Strategy Analytics. And what I'm talking about, there's an old article, I just stumbled across it today at WCCFtech.com, where he was interviewed back in April and scarily omniscient about, how predictive his statement actually was. Now, you can take 5 people making different predictions and then point to one after the fact and say, wow, they were bang on. But that's just as a result of having 5 different guesses. One of them is likely bound to be the right one, right? But what's scary is how detailed he was in his analysis. So let's read his exact statement from back in April. Adoption of the more expensive high-end PC and game console-based devices will be limited to a subset of early adopter enthusiasts and hardcore gamers. The high price of these devices will act as a significant barrier to more widespread uptake. The PC and console-powered virtual reality market is entering the classic chicken and egg phase, whereby the major game publishers are waiting on the sidelines until there are enough VR headsets and users in the market for it to make financial sense for them to build a VR library of content. This is providing independent and niche developers the chance to make a name for themselves before the big boys arrive, which is pretty much bang on to what is happening, right? We've got us early adopters having purchased various VR devices, but still, we've supported it. We've purchased a lot of these games, which predominantly are exactly that, indie developed games, right? Or experiences. We're still waiting for, and many other people are waiting on the sidelines for those AAA offerings. This is where we have to have that patience that I talked about a few months ago. It's the lead up to the holidays. This is the slow grind of sales that hopefully PlayStation VR is going to help drive, even on the Vive and Rift side of the equation, to make it more palatable for people to buy because they see AAA offerings, right? Fortunately, we have AAA publishers that, regardless of the size of the market, are creating games and experiences. And it's those that I think are ultimately going to help drive that extra bit of sales to make it attractive for AAA publishers, right? Because one thing you can look at is it's easy to say, look, there's X number of PCs out there. That should translate to this many games, but we know the reality. People use PCs for all kinds of different things, right? With virtual reality devices, it's mostly people wanting a good gaming experience. So the market might be small, but it's probably going to be pretty fanatic in terms of sales. And you can probably have a high adoption rate for your game if it's good, if it's compelling. And that is a good reality to have. All right, guys, that's it for today's news. As always, cheers, and definitely catch you on the VR flip side.